He thought it would be a simple meal, just a man walking into a restaurant, hungry after a long day. But the moment he sat down, the air shifted. The waiter's forced smile faded, replaced by cold stares and dismissive gestures. Plates clattered around him, but his table remained empty, ignored, as if he didn't exist. What the waiter didn't know was that this man wasn't just another customer. His true identity would turn the entire room upside down. The question is, who really held the power here? It was a quiet Friday evening, the kind of night when most people were winding down from a long week. The restaurant buzzed with laughter, clinking glasses, and the low hum of conversation. At first glance, it seemed like just another busy night. Tables filled with families, couples, and co-workers eager to relax. Among the crowd walked Mr. Carter, a man known for his calm presence and quiet dignity. He wasn't dressed in anything flashy, just a simple shirt and jacket, carrying himself with the kind of ease that comes from years of hard work and self-respect. To everyone else, he looked like any ordinary customer, a man looking forward to a warm meal after a long day. But beneath that calm surface, Carter carried something more. He wasn't just another diner passing through. He was someone who had fought for every inch of respect in a world that too often judged him by his skin before his character. Tonight, however, he wanted none of that weight. He simply wanted dinner. As he walked through the doors, he noticed the polished floors, the soft lighting, and the waitstaff moving swiftly between tables. Everything appeared normal, until his presence seemed to shift the air around him. A fleeting look, a pause too long, a smile that didn't quite reach the eyes. Small things, but Carter had lived long enough to recognize when he wasn't welcome. He took a seat, unaware that within minutes, this ordinary dinner would turn into a test of dignity and a moment the entire restaurant would never forget. Mr. Carter sat quietly at his table, glancing over the menu. The room buzzed with energy, yet his corner seemed frozen in silence. A waiter passed by once, twice, 3 times, each time ignoring him, though he stopped to cheerfully greet other guests seated after him. Carter waited patiently, adjusting his jacket, pretending not to notice. But deep down, he knew exactly what was happening. He had seen this kind of treatment before, an unspoken message delivered not with words, but with neglect. Minutes turned into what felt like hours. Glasses clinked, plates filled tables, and laughter grew louder. Yet his table remained empty, without so much as a glass of water. The waiter glanced his way, his expression sharpening into something colder, more dismissive. When Carter finally caught his eye, the man gave a smirk that felt like a door slamming shut. Nearby guests began to notice. A family at the next table exchanged uneasy glances. A young couple whispered, "Why hasn't anyone helped him?" But no one spoke up loud enough to break the silence. The injustice was happening in plain sight, but silence held the room hostage. Finally, Carter raised his hand politely. The waiter walked over slowly, arms crossed, his tone dripping with false politeness. "We're a little busy tonight," he said curtly, before rushing away without taking his order. Within moments, Carter saw fresh drinks and steaming plates arrive at tables that had been seated much later. The message was clear: you don't belong here. Every second stretched into a quiet humiliation. Carter shifted in his chair, his patience thinning, but his dignity holding strong. He refused to create a scene. Yet the weight of the room pressed heavily, each moment of neglect cutting deeper. This wasn't just poor service, it was something more deliberate, more personal. The waiter, growing bolder, began avoiding Carter's table altogether, even turning his back when Carter made another attempt to catch his attention. The room had divided. Some guests forced themselves to look away, while others watched with sympathy but stayed silent. And just when it seemed the night would end in bitter defeat, the sound of the door opening shifted the air. The restaurant grew quieter, as if an unseen presence had entered. The waiter glanced up, ready with his usual charm, but the moment his eyes landed on the figure walking in, his face drained of color. The man who had just stepped through the doors was no ordinary guest. His arrival carried authority, respect, and a kind of power that instantly commanded the room. The waiter froze, realizing in that split second that everything he had done was about to catch up with him. What the room didn't yet know, but was about to discover, was that this man wasn't just any customer. He was the very person who owned the restaurant, and his eyes had locked directly on Carter's lonely table. The waiter's confident stride faltered as the owner walked deeper into the restaurant. Conversations dipped, and a hush seemed to follow him across the room. His presence carried authority. Every staff member straightened, every eye watched. But his gaze never wavered. It locked on the man sitting alone, the man who had been deliberately ignored. Carter sat still, his dignity unshaken, though the weight of humiliation still hung heavy. For him, this wasn't the first time, yet tonight felt different. He didn't know why, not yet. The owner reached Carter's table and pulled out the empty chair, sliding into it without hesitation. His eyes scanned the untouched menu, the bare table, the absence of even a glass of water. Then slowly he turned his attention to the waiter frozen in place across the room. The silence cracked like glass. "Explain this!" the owner's voice boomed, not in anger, but in disbelief that carried more weight than a shout ever could. The waiter's face turned pale. He stammered, excuses fumbling from his lips, but none could survive the truth laid bare for all to see. Every customer knew what had happened. The smirks, the neglect, the deliberate dismissal, exposed in a single glance from the owner. No one looked away now. Phones lifted discreetly, eyes widened, and the reality of the moment grew heavier with each second. The waiter had tried to strip Carter of his dignity, but instead, his own actions stood trial before the entire room. Carter didn't move. He didn't need to. The power had shifted, not with loud protests, but with quiet truth. And the next words from the owner would determine everything. The restaurant held its breath. The silence in the restaurant grew heavier with every passing second. Then the owner stood, his voice calm but cutting through the air with undeniable force. He turned to the staff, to the guests, and finally to the trembling waiter. "This man is not just a guest," he said. "He is a human being. And tonight you chose to treat him as if he were invisible. That will never happen under my roof again." The waiter's excuses fell apart before he could form them. The truth was plain. Customers had witnessed everything, and the shame was irreversible. With a single gesture, the owner dismissed the waiter from the floor, his career unraveling in the same instant he thought he held the power. Carter, still seated, remained composed. He didn't gloat, didn't rise to anger. He simply nodded as the owner placed a hand on his shoulder, a quiet acknowledgement of both the pain endured and the dignity preserved. In that moment, the humiliation Carter had carried was lifted, not erased, but transformed into something larger. The restaurant slowly exhaled. Some patrons applauded softly, others lowered their heads in guilt, realizing they had sat in silence too long. It wasn't just about one man being ignored, it was about what that silence represented. Because racism rarely announces itself loudly. More often it lingers in the small, cutting moments, an empty table, a withheld smile, a door that never opens. These moments accumulate, carving scars that can't be seen but are always felt. That night, justice was served in an unexpected way. But the larger truth remains. Not every story ends with the owner walking in. Too often, the victims are left unseen, unheard, and unchanged by the world around them. So the question lingers. How many more Carters will sit at tables waiting for the dignity they deserve before society finally learns to serve justice at every seat?